We'll pick up the thread from where I left off and talk about emotions. I had been saying that reason is the all-important factor when we're trying to find out what's true, when we're trying to know what's real in the world, and that ultimately if we use any other alleged shortcuts to knowledge, they all boil down to using an epistemology of emotions. You could call it an epistemology of faith, but it comes down to emotions and feeling, because that's really all we have. Either we have our intellect and our conceptual knowledge arrived at, as I said, through reasons and building a structure of knowledge, lower concepts, higher concepts, and higher concepts. Either we have that, or we have our emotions, which is where we just go, well, I just feel that that's true. That there really isn't much else left within the human consciousness, and there's no other means for us to claim this idea is right. Yeah. So what I'm going to illustrate next is the what I call the epistemology of emotion versus the epistemology of reason. And we're going to look at the two together so that hopefully we can all see with clarity the advantages of very consciously standing on, I'm going to use epistemology of reason. I'm going to really make sure I'm doing that all the time. I'm going to acknowledge my feelings. I'm going to say, yep, that's how I feel about this. But I'm not going to take feelings as a guide to truth. I'm going to listen to my heart or my gut, and I'm going to follow the intuition, the hunch, and use that as a starting point for my investigation. Just like an investigator would, investigating any murder case. You get a hunch, you've interviewed a few people, you just get a funny hunch that something, and that's your pointer saying, dig there. Let's go and investigate there. That's where to go. And so the feelings should be recognized, gut feelings, hunches, intuitions, whatever we want to call them. They should be recognized, and they should be taken deliberately over here to the epistemology of reason, and then we apply a method. We try to resolve all the contradictions, however long it takes, and sometimes it can take a long time. There's no shortcut. But the epistemology of reason is the tool to arrive at what you can claim as knowledge rather than feeling. If you feel something's true, you can say you believe it, but you can't rightly claim it as knowledge, although a lot of people do. So, what are these things called emotions? Another faculty of our human consciousness, a very important one, a wonderful one. Another key component of being human. And the reason, as I said, Aristotle defined humans as the rational animal. He didn't necessarily make this conclusion, and the reason that I am convinced of this as well, that it's not our emotions that define us as human beings. Some people might have this idea, and they might think, well, hang on, Captain Kirk in Star Trek, he was human because he had emotions. You know, robots don't have emotions. They're logical, they're rational. They're programmed to be, I suppose. So why aren't emotions our defining feature as humans? And the point that I hope to communicate with you here today is that emotions aren't primaries. They're not, or rather they are derived. They're derived, they come from reason. Reason is first. Without a rational faculty, without the ability to accumulate conceptual knowledge and to identify our values, without that process happening first, then emotions can't happen. So I hope to, you're not convinced at the moment, but I hope to paint this picture as we go. So the first point, which I think we've already mentioned, is that in our culture, we're largely sort of, we currently emotions have a very high place, if you like. We looked at political correctness and things. So what are emotions? Now, the understanding that most of us have, without having done any thought about it, if you've just grown up and listened to your parents, watched films, listened to the news and listened to your teachers, so if you've just been here on the planet in Western culture, you would have inevitably absorbed this idea that emotions are inexplicable, and they come from somewhere but we don't know what, and they're treated as primaries, as starting points, a given. And Sigmund Freud, the famous creator of psychoanalysis, who I'm sure we've all heard of, he's probably one of the most famous advocates of this idea. He said that he referred to the subconscious as the unconscious. He called it the id. And emotions just sort of came. Archaic urges was a phrase he used. They're in us. We can't explain them. And in the absence of explanation, again, of course, mystics rush in to provide answers, such as, that they come from somewhere else, or this is the mystic, unknowable part of humans that proves, allegedly, that we go somewhere else, or we're all part of one consciousness, or there's a deity. All of these fanciful ideas that sound good, and a lot of them are appealing. Reincarnation, I mean, what a wonderful idea that is. I wish that was true. I don't hold it to be true, but I think it's a great idea. It's very appealing. But anyway, so the mainstream idea is that they're unexplainable. They're just there. We have to deal with them. And, we've got our rational faculty, but we've got these things called emotions. And, why can't we use them to know what's true? And, of course, most people, having grown up in our culture where emotions are valued implicitly, nobody tells us, our teachers at school don't say, emotions are a form of knowledge. If you feel it, it's true. They don't say that, but the message is there implicit. It's not mentioned, but it's there by necessity. So there's an alternative view of emotions, another way of approaching the whole idea, which I propose to you might make more sense to you, as it does for me, than considering them to be inexplicable. Okay, so I'm going to run this view of emotions, which is Rand's, it's not mine. I picked up on this idea, and I'm simply representing it in my own words, if you like. So any errors are mine. Rand is the original, the original source. So, according to Rand, let's remind ourselves let's talk about values to start off with. So, it is a fact of reality that we humans need values to live. We don't have any automatic knowledge. We obviously need food, we need air, we need clean water, we need shelters. We need things, we need stuff to support our ongoing existence. Let's call these values. Now, Rand identified values as that for which we act to gain or keep. So we do something to get a value or to retain it. Yeah, I've got a home, I want to keep my home, I'd fight to defend it, sort of thing. You act to either gain values or retain them, essentially. And they're a key component of human life. Just think for a moment about the importance of the concept of values. It's probably one you've never thought about before. I hadn't, before I came across this work. But values are absolutely essential to human life. And they don't grow on trees. We don't necessarily find everything in nature. I mean, okay, hunter-gatherers, yes, you can go and gather some berries, kill a wild animal, but really when we factor everything in. Values don't. We don't find them in nature. We've got to build roads and houses and computers, all of these things that we need to support human life. We human beings must make. Yeah, somebody's got to do some thinking and figure out electricity. I mean, somebody figured that out. Isn't that great? Figured out that if you spin a coil in a magnetic field, it produces this thing that we all now use and take for granted. Somebody, that's a result of human thinking rationally. It isn't just groping in the dark and following your higher self and feeling this is true. No, that wouldn't have discovered electricity or anything else that we take for granted. So values are absolutely central. We need them. We can't live without values. But values aren't just stuff. They're conditions of existence, as I mentioned, clean air and clean water, peace and political stability. That's a kind of an abstract concept, but it's something we need. It's a value. If there were bombs landing and hurling and explosions in the street, we can all readily grasp that our lives would stop to some extent. Shit, we've got an emergency here. We've lost the value of peace and stability in our community. We've now got something to deal with. So the point is that values can be a condition, not necessarily something that you can touch or see. So our values are also, you can think of them as the things that we find important. So supposing somebody likes to go fishing. Fishing is everything to Bob. He loves fishing. You could say that fishing is a value to Bob. He gets an enormous amount of recreation. He finds peace and solitude by the river. He gets away from the hustle and bustle. He values this activity of fishing in this example. Somebody else might have a value. I dream of building my own house. That's a real important value to me. It's something I want to do in my life. You can't touch it or pin it down, but that's an important value. So this is what I mean when I talk about human values. Everything from a decent meal, healthy food, clean water, homes, cars, stuff, relationships. What an important value that is. Friends. And here we come into spiritual values. Now, I have a different definition of spiritual. My definition of spiritual is pertaining to consciousness. So things to do with consciousness is my view of spiritual, because being a rational guy, I having grown up with the idea of God and all that, I now don't hold those ideas to be true. I don't see any reasons for them. I've let them go. So spiritual to me has meaning. It's a very meaningful concept, and it means pertaining to consciousness. Yeah. So there are very important values that pertain to consciousness. Knowledge. What a huge value that is. Because without knowledge we can't act. As we said, friendships, a loving partner, another massive value. So what I'm trying to get across here is that values is a really big idea as well. It's a really big concept. Human values. And we need them. Just as much as we need food, we need love. We need a family. We need friends. We need people we can talk to about stuff. So values is a key concept in understanding emotions and why they happen and where they come from. And the other thing that's very important is our knowledge base. We have, for example, if we obviously all value our life. That's it almost goes without saying, but in our knowledge base, so all of our activities and all of our things we do, we're obviously trying to preserve our life. So if somebody rings this place up and says, "Oh, the bomb's going to go off in such and such a restaurant wherever we are," then obviously we'd all be concerned, and we might feel fear for that value of our life, because our knowledge base, everything we know about the facts of reality, tells us that bombs are dangerous things end up flying through the air, we get hit by the shrapnel, we could lose our life. It's a danger. And that comes from our knowledge base. So our knowledge base informs us that our value is threatened. And then there's an emotional response, very appropriately, of fear. Let's get out the building. Let's go somewhere else. So emotions depend on our set of values. Is very important. They depend on our knowledge base of all the implications and things that will affect those values. And then something happens. Some event, somebody says something, somebody does something. That is the thing that precipitates the emotion. So I've talked about what is a value. So I'm just catching up with my notes here. Yeah. So an emotion is a response to something that happens with respect to our set of values. Now, we all have a different set of values. Bob likes fishing. I don't. That's not value for me. I like to shoot some pool. That's different. So we all have a very different set of values. Obviously, we have some in common. We all value our life. We all value political stability and peace. But we have an enormous number of preferences. Not necessarily needs, but preferences of things that we like. And this is our value system. So let's consider an example. So supposing there's a flight, I flew recently from London to here on Friday. Supposing there was a cancellation of that flight and it was delayed not a cancellation, a delay, and it was delayed 24 hours. So different people on that aeroplane or going to get that flight could have a totally different emotional response to that occurrence. So what we're illustrating here is that it isn't the thing that happens that determines the emotion. It's values that determine it. So let's consider first person that's potentially on that aeroplane has got a busy meeting. If it was me coming over here to Stockholm, to Gothenburg, to talk to you guys, and if my plane was cancelled, I'd be feeling shit. That's bad news. I'm anxious. I'm cross about that. Now I've got to find out some other means of getting there. So it's going to precipitate annoyance, inconvenience. I'm going to be cross about that, and an associated set of emotional responses. But supposing somebody else who was going to take that aeroplane and come back to Gothenburg, supposing some young chap had just spent 2 weeks with his new sweetheart. He's passionately in love. This means everything to him, and now he's got an opportunity to spend a couple more days with his girlfriend. He might be really pleased. Thank goodness that flight's cancelled. So he may feel a hugely different emotional response to the same thing that's happened. And there may be somebody else potentially on that flight that's into mindfulness and just trying to accept everything and being at peace with what happens. They might be on a mindfulness course or something. And they would say, okay, well, that's just what happened. I can't help it. I'll get the next flight. So what? So you've got 3 different emotional responses to the same thing that happens, depending on the values of those people. One person really values getting to Gothenburg because they need to, because they've got important stuff to do. The other person would prefer to be actually staying in London. And the third person is, well, it's easy. I'm not feeling stressed. I can just cope with it. So the point is that emotions very much depend on the value system of the person feeling the emotion. And it depends on how we estimate the thing that's happening will potentially affect our values. So, again, to use another sort of disaster example, if you'll forgive me, supposing a gunman burst into a room and was brandishing a machine gun. Again, we all value our lives, and our knowledge base tells us that the consequences of this thing we perceive, and we can see that somebody's got a gun. We immediately know that that's a threat to our value. the value that is our life, and we'll feel fear. But if you were to have, imagine like a young baby in the room that hasn't yet any knowledge of what a gun is, and assume for a moment that they're not going to tune in to the fear of everybody else, because obviously that could tell the baby to be fearful. But imagine the baby just perceived this thing, a black thing that someone was holding. If they had no knowledge that that was a potential threat to life, they wouldn't necessarily have any cause to feel fear. If, for example, you maybe had some indigenous tribes person that never come across a gun, if they were in a similar sort of situation as that, they might, again, not have the knowledge base. They might not see the implication on their value. That's the important thing. Something happens. How is that going to affect my values? So the understanding is a key part in the chain of how my values are going to be affected by whatever it is I'm emotionally responding to, and also affected by what are my particular values. You know, if I have a bunch of friends that are golf fanatics and we're going on this golf trip and the whole thing's cancelled, that could seriously affect, you know, they might have some real sad emotions about that. Supposing it was an annual event and it meant a lot to them, it can invoke a particular emotional response that is dependent on their values. It's really important to go to that particular meeting, that golfing tournament or something. I'm gutted that I'm not going to do that. I'm really sad about that. So I hope you're beginning to see that values are an important component, and our knowledge base, as well as just the thing that happens. And maybe we can begin to appreciate that emotions don't come from nowhere. If assuming you've understood what I've said so far, I hope you're beginning to see that there is a reason for an emotional response. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. So, a complicating factor with human values is that we're not all consciously aware of our values. We can hold values that we deny. You know, I love chocolate binging, but hang on, I'm really into health. Oops, there's a contradiction there. So that's a value that potentially I might feel guilty about, might not want to tell people about. If I'm at a health conference or discussing my enthusiasm for health with some people, I'm going to be very reluctant to talk about, you know, occasional puff on a cigar or a chocolate binge. So we are capable, we humans, of denying some of our values, some of the things that we really sneakily quite like to do, but maybe our knowledge base tells us that it's harmful for us, or maybe just everyone around us doesn't do that. So there can be a lot of reasons why we won't want to consciously recognize our values. And going into repression is another thing. That's probably a deeper psychological issue of not recognizing our values. We don't need to go that far, but if we have values that we're not conscious of, the point is they can still trigger emotional responses because they're there. They haven't gone away. Those values are there. A is A, remember. If you value something, if you have a passion, it is your passion. You know, it's there. Unrecognized things don't go away. It's a very important extension of the idea that A is A, and recognizing facts and that reality is independent of consciousness. So another thing about emotions is that they're immediate. You don't have to think about it. You know, you don't. If for example, you know, you're happily married, and you find out your wife's having an affair, or your partner or your husband is having an affair, the moment that you found that out, you're going to have an emotional response just like that. You don't need to sit down and think to yourself, well, hang on, I'm happily married, I really like my wife, you know, oh, dear, you know, you haven't got to do that, and it's obvious, we all get that, it's straight away. So this again complicates the issue when we consider emotions, because we think, gosh, you know, where did that come from? Surely it can't be to do with facts and reasons, because I didn't need to think about anything, it just came from anywhere. And where did it come from? It comes from your subconscious. your knowledge of the implications of finding out about your partner's affair, your knowledge base that's down there in your subconscious is all there. The implications of, shit, what we're going to do with the children, who's going to have custody, where am I going to live, what we're going to do with the house, all of that sort of stuff is there in your subconscious. Whoops. And if you can obviously go through a process of actually thinking about it and trawling all that information up. But the point is, in the moment of your emotional response, it's instant and it's fed to you from your subconscious in the same way that if I asked you what your favorite color is, you wouldn't be thinking about your favorite color, but as soon as I ask you what's your favorite color, it comes to mind. And, trivial, what's your favorite car or what's your favorite holiday destination? It's not in your mind, but it's instantly available to you. You don't have to think about it. Oh, my favorite holiday destination is so. Well, actually, sometimes you may have to think about it. You get the point. It comes from your subconscious immediately. The implications of finding out about an affair, for example, the implications are there absolutely immediately. The oh my God, jaw-dropping thing doesn't need to be considered for very long. So if we update our knowledge base, if we change our knowledge, this is one way where we can change our emotions. So because you've got this causal chain, thinking is at the beginning. Thinking, reasoning, acquiring knowledge, using the epistemology of reason, and we start off. So thinking is the beginning. We identify our values, and we acquire a knowledge base, and then stuff happens to which we we respond with emotions. So we've got these variables. Our values are one variable. Our knowledge base is another variable, because although we consider it our knowledge, remember, it may not be true. Knowledge, by definition, is true. In order for you to say that's knowledge, you've got to have that level of certainty beyond a reasonable doubt in order to say, I hold that as knowledge. Obviously, most people don't do that. They consider their knowledge anything that they think. Oh, I think that's true, therefore it's my knowledge. But technically speaking, knowledge must be true. So we can change our knowledge base. We can update it. So, for example, in the recent pandemic, lots of people were very, very scared about dying. Pandemic, nasty virus around, put on your masks. A very good reason to be scared. If your knowledge base informs you that your value of your life and your health is potentially being threatened, it's very logical to then feel fear. But there's a problem in that sequence of events, in that chain. Some of you may agree with that, or I don't know, but I personally don't hold that viruses are a real threat. So the ins and outs of that issue aren't very important, but imagine if somebody, in the same happening, the same occurrence of a pandemic, if somebody else in their knowledge base, they have some reasons to not fear viruses and contagion, because there's actually a lot of evidence, there's a lot of reasons you can stack up to hold up the idea that you don't have to worry about viruses. But that's another story. But if somebody experiencing the pandemic, it's happening, it had greater significance, obviously not here in Sweden where you guys weren't locked down. But if that person's knowledge base is such that they do not fear viruses, then something happens, pandemic, I value my life, knowledge base tells me the pandemic's a load of nonsense, emotional reaction, no fear. Where's the fear? There isn't any reason for it. So we can control our emotional response by getting our knowledge base sorted. Massive values, knowledge, and reason. Again, it all comes down to reason is the thing on which you build your knowledge base, and having an accurate knowledge base that reflects reality as it is really, really important. because in a context of today, where our emotions are very much played with by the media, lots of stories are sown, and there's lots of frightening things, AIDS, terrorism, climate change. I mean, the list is endless, isn't it? All of the big things in the narrative are potentially scary. So, updating our knowledge base gives us some control, albeit limited, on our emotional response. So emotions aren't something that just come out of nowhere. We can understand why we feel a particular way about a particular thing. And we know that although we can't control emotions directly, what we can control is our knowledge base, and control it to the extent that we can make sure it's all true. You can't do any more than that. Either it's all false or it's progressively true to all true, which is unlikely. Most people's is probably a mixture. But the point is you can modify your knowledge base by increasing the degree of facts and truth within it, and we can change and modify our value system. So we might not think about changing your value system, but we can do that. It's a byproduct of acquiring knowledge. In today's context, where there's, increasing loss of political freedom, there are all sorts of problems. We can, by increasing our knowledge base, we can certainly prevent feeling unnecessary fear. And we'll come on to talking about, again, the epistemology of emotions versus reason, because in the context of today, where people are manipulated and they are herded into certain behaviors using their emotions, not by accident, I hasten to add. There may be many ways that we're mind controlled, but certainly the use of fear is definitely one component of it. And we don't need to be victims. We don't need to be encouraged into compromising our values, taking vaccination shots, for example, because we're scared and we haven't updated our knowledge base. So yeah, changing values. It's easy to go through life not worried about health. Most young people couldn't give a shit about health. I know my children, health, what's that? Why would you care? But of course, as you get older, I'm in my 50s, and these things become increasingly important. We suddenly start to see the end of our existence coming over the horizon. So values change in that we can become more concerned about something like health, for example. And that can cause us to modify our behavior. And it will also, as we increase that base of knowledge, it'll change the way we feel about doing certain things. You might start to feel guilty about smoking cigarettes, and rightly so. You might start to feel guilt about drinking too much or eating junk food, chocolate binging, these various things. And these are logical and valid emotions. You should. And there's nothing wrong with that guilt in that sense, because you know half of your consciousness knows that you need to not eat junk food, and then you've got this value that you're still clinging to, another part of your consciousness, that, well, I really like eating burgers and chips and indulging in chocolate. So there's a bit of a conflict, but the emotional conflict can be resolved eventually when values are updated and all behavior and choices are brought into line. Not easy, I hasten to add, but it is possible by choosing our values rationally and modifying our knowledge appropriately, or updating it, to have some control over our emotional response to things, and most importantly, not be emotionally cajoled into doing something, not be emotionally scared into voting one way or another, or buying into the idea of climate change and agreeing that we all have to give up our cars or something like that. So yeah, maybe I'm repeating myself. So lastly, if you could imagine, in theory, because I don't think anyone does have 100% rational values, it's very difficult. I still, as a 58-year-old, I'm a part-time smoker. Crazy irrational value, it undermines my health, but if I'm at a party and I'm having a few drinks, I might have a puff on a cigarette, and crazy though that is. So that's an irrational value. So, but the point here is that if our values were all stacked up rationally, so there was nothing that you held to be important, there was nothing that you acted to gain or keep that compromised your life in any way, then you wouldn't experience any conflicting emotions. You'd still feel plenty of emotions, you'd still feel fear when somebody pulled a gun on you. Emotions don't go away, but you wouldn't experience any conflicting emotions. And the point is here that emotions can conflict, and we probably all have experience of emotions conflicting, and the root of that is that you have conflicting values. Somewhere in your psyche, somewhere in your subconscious mind, you value this and you value that, and there's a problem because they contradict. You can't have this and you can't have that. You can't smoke 40 cigarettes a day for 60 years and have good health. They just don't work together. There's a contradiction.
You have short-term value and long-term value. It's nice to have a smoke at the party, but you know that conflict long-term value of staying healthy.
Yes, and it can be a juggling game with values. And again, this is a part of being rational, trying to see the bigger picture. And, if somebody loves chocolate and we find out for some reason, lots of people say that sugar's bad for you and chocolate might be bad, yada, yada, yada. Let's assume that eating chocolate's bad for you. That's debatable. But should that person give up eating chocolate and potentially have a really, if that's something that's really important to them, deny themselves that pleasure through their remaining years of existence? I would say not necessarily. They may well choose to do. But that's part of the rational evaluation. And thinking long term is a very important component of rationality. And thank you for reminding me of that one, Patrick. It's very important to consider the long term. If going right back to the beginning, where I said we all share that value that we want our lives to be as best they can, we'd like to live a long time, we don't want to die next week, and we want to enjoy health and functionality and success and wealth and enjoyment, pleasure. If we bear in mind that long-term goal, which is that's what we're actually doing, whether or not we're conscious of it, thinking long-term is really important, and weighing things against each other. Should I give up that irrational value? Or in the bigger scheme of things, maybe I can just cope with that one. Maybe the reward for the chocolate binge or the occasional toot at the party, maybe that gives in one of us a certain amount of pleasure that we don't want to relinquish. So dealing with emotions is something of a compromise, and I think that's okay. Discerning truth isn't a compromise, but I think managing one's emotions and changing one's values certainly is. So I hope that nothing I've said. Well, actually, let me just summarize first. So the point is that emotions are not tools of cognition. They're not a means to know something is real. Something happens and you feel that this may be right about it, then perhaps all the news people tell you something, they sow the idea and you feel that that's right. That is not a guide to whether or not that idea is true. And it certainly isn't a
I know I love my son because I feel so much love. It's like
Absolutely.
Conflicting will always, from my personal, but I love my child, I want to be with him, I love him, I want independence. Emotion, seeing so flourishing, I love.
So is the conflict you don't want to let him go?
The conflicting emotion is that because I'm with them,
Right.
and I feel joy because I see them flourishing and getting on.
Right.
So I think that as long as we're human, we will have.
Yes. I would suggest, with great respect, that there is a conflict in your values, because if you love your son and you want to see him happy, if him leaving you makes him happy, box ticked.
Yes,
Done deal. He's happy, so your value of wanting him near you is actually contradicting the value of him having his independence. There's the contradiction.
Yes, and I find for me, I will say it for the.
Okay, we can delve into these things in the. I hasten to add that we all have conflicting values. Okay, so please don't anyone feel like there's a problem or you need psychotherapy or something because you've got conflicting values. You know, welcome to being human.
Just one short thing. Also, when I'm with friends and I feel one of my friends feel bad, I think my feelings are the best measurement to know this is not my friend anymore. I spend more time with them, completely based on feelings.
Yeah, it's also values, because if you're talking to somebody and they're saying things, we're talking broad strokes here because you're not giving any details, but if they're saying something that makes you feel bad or you find is contrary to your values, you're getting a very real cognitive piece of information that says, my values and this person's are different. I prefer not to be with them. So I would suggest maybe there's not really a contradiction. And feelings are valid. Again, I'm coming on to...
Part of it, I think, it's a dance between... Sometimes it's only fact, of course, but it's a dance, feelings and knowledge.
Indeed, it is.
The whole thing.
It is. I'm not being, dogmatic about anything here. Hopefully, we can learn to understand the role emotions are playing in our lives, and maybe.
No, they are not. Sorry.
Yeah.
They are not almost true, but they are there to also consider it. Okay, I have this feeling, but I should even listen to the facts.
Yeah.
So, but still I have this, which is, and it's fine.
Yeah. Feelings might be true, let me hasten to add. You might have this feeling that something is true, and it might be. But the point is, you can't know it because you haven't yet got any reasons. You've just got the feeling. And the feeling can be wrong. So how do you know if the feeling is right or wrong? Find out what the reasons are. The reasons will always support truth or falsity, not the emotions. But the emotions can be correctly identifying truth. The point is that they aren't the sanction of your conviction. They aren't the thing that makes you darn certain that that's true, yeah? We can thrash this out. So I hope that it's clear that I'm not knocking emotions, and I think one of the, we're talking about reason here. We're talking about reason and logic, and generally speaking, I think it's true to say that perhaps it's a hangover from the Dr. Spock in Star Trek propaganda and the head over the heart. But there's a tendency, we've all been immersed in a culture that suggests, if it doesn't directly say so, that if you're logical, you're cold and calculated, and you're somehow denying your emotions. So I want it to be really clear here that I'm massively pro-emotion. I think they're wonderful things. And the purpose is to clearly identify the role of reason in acquiring knowledge that you can be confident is true, and then consulting your emotions to enjoy life, having a beer with some friends, going fishing, having children, building homes, pursuing careers, starting businesses. All these are wonderful things that we can emotionally get such a big hit from. The human experience is amazing. It's just fantastic, the things we can do and the amount of joy we can get. If you build a family and have children, if you build a business, something I haven't done, but I can understand that building a big business and expanding it and having 500 people work for you, and look at all these livelihoods, and I'm making money, and look, I can get a new car, and wow, I would feel good about that. I'd feel amazing if I'd done that. So emotions are really, really important. Obviously, the means by which we enjoy our lives. But the point is, they don't actually tell us what's true. Only reason can. So I want to move on now with that. What I've said about emotions. I'm not inviting you to agree with me. Just hold all these thoughts. Let them just sort of float about for a moment and sort of try them on, if you like. And I'm going to talk about these two epistemologies, what I call the epistemology of reason, and with the epistemology of faith, it's called on this slide, but bear with me, the old slide. Epistemology of faith amounts to epistemology of emotion. So, just by way of a recap, the epistemology of reason is rooted and based on the philosophical bedrock is the recognition that A is A. Things are what they are. That self-evidently obvious thing that shouldn't even need to be said. It seems so bloody obvious that why would anybody even bother to say it? It's at the base of all human knowledge, the whole structure, the whole huge edifice that is human knowledge rests on the floor of A is A. Reality is real, the chair's the chair, the computer's the computer. That's what it rests on. So we have to be super careful to consciously stand on that ground. And if we recognize that reality is real, A is A, that's metaphysics. And the epistemological equivalent, in fact, it's the same idea, but expressed in epistemological terms, is that contradictions don't exist. So A is A, things are what they are, means, or another way of saying it is, that something can't be what it is and not what it is at the same time. If things are what they are, then they can't be what they're not. Hence, you have this epistemological principle, contradictions can't exist. And again, it seems so simple and maybe unnecessary to mention, but its importance can't be overstated. It really is quite incredible. Contradictions cannot exist is the epistemological bedrock of rational thinking, the thinking process, logic, all comes out of that principle. Contradictions don't exist. And as we may go on to discuss later on, in our culture, that's questioned. 100 years ago, with quantum physics and Einstein and the double slit experiment and all of this sort of thing, allegedly, we were told that contradictions do exist after all, because light can be a particle and a wave. But that's maybe something to talk about later on. But just to acknowledge that there are many things talked about in our culture that would have you believe that contradictions do exist. But you must stand firmly on the solid ground that contradictions don't exist, because you can verify it in your own experience. You don't have to listen to what the quantum physicists say. If that's contradicting your own experience, can we be here in Gothenburg and in Stockholm at the same time? No, we can't. If we're here, we're here. And we can't be here and not here at the same time. So the idea that contradictions don't exist is easy to verify. Nobody should be in any doubt about that. And that's the beauty of it. So you can stand there on that solid ground saying, I know that. I'm going to start from what I know, and I can build up from there. So maybe I'm overstating the point. But epistemology of reason rests on the recognition of reality and that contradictions don't exist. But the epistemology of emotions and faith necessarily denies that. It has to. The epistemology of faith ignores the fact that reality is real, that things are what they are. It ignores reasons and says, no, I feel this, I don't need reasons. Reasons are not important. Which implicitly, again, this concept of the implied, it's not talked about, it's not recognized, but it's still there. In order for you to say, reasons are unnecessary, I don't need reasons, I'm going to go with this feeling, and that for me is true, that implies that you're not standing on this firm ground where there's no sorry, tongue-tied. It implies that you're not any longer standing on this epistemological principle that contradictions don't exist, and you're now standing on, well, contradictions can exist, because I can feel things that are true that might well contradict facts. Look, Tom and Bill are telling me that I'm wrong, but and they say they have reasons, but I feel that this is true. So you're implicitly, when we go with the epistemology of faith, we are rejecting this need to stand explicitly on reasons, and implicitly, without even knowing it, we are standing on the philosophical ground of reality isn't real. It can be whatever I feel it to be, whatever I want it to be. Contradictions can exist. Miracles can happen. In my Catholic upbringing, miracles were, yeah, of course they exist. So in the epistemology of reason, we have this method of logic. Our capacity or our faculty of reason enables us to recognize contradictions. That's the method. That's the method of thinking. It's the most important part. Obviously, there's finding out information, weighing ideas, there's lots of other things to do, but the basis, the essence of the method is logic. Have I got a contradiction here? Okay, when you've arrived at reasons supporting something in a non-contradictory way, then you can move forward. Then you have knowledge and certainty to beyond a reasonable doubt. The problem with the epistemology of faith is that there is no method. If you're not using logic, if contradictions can exist, you're just accepting ideas. We're just putting on our masks and getting our vaccinations and getting rid of our diesel cars to buy electric cars just because we're told to. If we're not identifying the reasons and then the claimed reasons and then the contradictions within them, if we're not doing that, if we're just accepting an idea, there is no method. We're using faith. We're feeling about it, and we can't, as I mentioned earlier, we can't arrive at what we claim to be knowledge. We can only say that we have a set of beliefs. We believe this to be true. And of course, religious dogma is all about that. It's all about, consult the the book of dogma, the Quran, the Torah, or the Bible. So one of the negative things associated with that is that certainty cannot be possible. If you don't have reasons to hold an idea as true, you can't be certain. You can never feel certain, because you can't fool your subconscious into accepting that you have reasons when you don't. Your subconscious mind can't be fooled. If you have no reasons and you've just accepted something, you know that. It's in there in the back of your mind, and it will just keep irritating you, and you think, shit, I'm not sure about that. And rightly so. So certainty is impossible without reasons. Certainty is a measure of how much evidence, how many reasons we've got to believe in something. That's how you increase your certainty. So if you haven't got any, you haven't even got off the ground. And you can only end up being anxious. And again, I think it's a very widespread phenomena today, certainly in England. So many people are anxious, so many people are depressed, so many people don't know what the flip's going on, and they genuinely feel anxious about it. Maybe that's why they escape into computer games and videos and Netflix and goodness knows. But anxiety is a real problem. And it's rooted in not using an epistemology of reason. If you have reasons for things, you needn't feel uncertain. You're in danger of repeating myself. You may not feel 100% certain, but you can feel certain enough to act on. And that's all you need. That's all you need. It's beyond a reasonable doubt, okay, I'm going to act on that. That's safe to act on. So another consequence, the next important consequence of this epistemology of reason is that rational argument is possible. If we're all on the same page and we are adhering to reasons, we're looking for them, and we're all valuing this epistemology of reason, which there's a lot to, I hasten to say. This is just a very brief suggestion, it's a very brief outline of two methods. We're not going into the methods of this, but it's just a very broad overview. But if we are all on the same page, looking for reasons, then rational argument and discussion, rational argument and discussion become possible. You can say, Nigel, you're wrong, because what about this? What about that? That's offering a reason. It's offering a reason that contradicts my claim of knowledge, and we can discuss. And then somebody else might say, well, I think you're wrong because what about this? I've heard that blah, 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 blah. That's another proposition, which may or may not be true, we'll find out. But the fact that we're all engaged and we all value reason, the fact that we're all consciously standing on, no, reason's really important, means that we can willingly discuss and exchange ideas and be willing to be wrong, as we touched on earlier. Debate, negotiation, persuasion is all possible. But on the other hand, with the epistemology of faith and emotion, where do you start with a discussion? Where do the Muslims start discussing with the Christians about Allah or God? Where does that even get off the ground? Of course it doesn't. There's nowhere to start if for any set of reasons just accepted. And I know lots of people back home who would say, well, you just got to get your vaccination. You know, when the government says you're going to save Granny and help everybody else by getting your shot, you know, you've just got to do that just because. And if you say, well, why? Why do we need? Why is a vaccination necessary? You might say. And that, of course, is beginning the digging process of a process of reason. But if you're dealing with people that are using the epistemology of faith, no, well, I just accept it. I've taken it on faith. I feel that I should. So you've got nowhere to go. That's the point. You can't exchange ideas, you can't exchange reasons and evaluate them if reasons aren't there, if they're not important. So you've only really got assertions, and all you can have is conflict. And this is, of course, why we have religious conflicts. Religion is known for wars and conflicts because it isn't based in reason. It may pay lip service to a certain amount of reason, and of course the religionists will tell you it's all rational and it's reasonable, but you and I can see from the outside, being objective, that it's not actually based on reasons ultimately. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, so I won't repeat, the implicity of reason necessarily supports all successful human action, anything you want to do. If you want to build a garden shed, the first thing you've got to do is get rational and find out where am I going to put it, how big can it be, what foundations I'm going to use, how much can I afford, what shed am I going to buy. There's endless rational questions that you'd ask and satisfy the answer to in any human endeavor. So it implicitly, reason supports any success. It implicitly supports prosperity and material abundance. And I mentioned that it implicitly supports peace as well. And the tragic opposite of that is that the epistemology of faith cannot resolve conflict. It's impossible. All you've got is might is right. All you've got is a bigger army than the other person. All you've got is a better propaganda machine, maybe. But there's no way of exchanging, comparing ideas. So all you can really end up with is the principle of might is right. How else would you work out what's right if you haven't got reasons? And there isn't a way. There's a certain amount of overlap, I think, on this slide, so forgive me that. Essentially looking at the consequences of using each epistemology, but we've sort of spoken about that. But one of the ones I want to draw attention to is that with the epistemology of reason, we can extend our knowledge, we can correct it. We have a mechanism. We can correct wrong things. We can be persuaded. But with the epistemology of emotion, all there can be is stagnation. Human knowledge can't progress if you take the epistemology of reason to its logical conclusion. If we don't need reasons to support ideas and to demonstrate their validity and their truth, then we cannot modify our knowledge, we can't extend our knowledge. And intellectual stagnation is all that can result. And indeed it did result. Maybe we'll talk about the history later, but the Dark Ages, after a period of reason from ancient Greece through Rome and its decay, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, here in Europe, were a period of stagnation for 1,000 years or thereabouts. Nothing happened. No innovations, no technological increase, nothing. And that was an era that was dominated by mysticism. Reason was out of fashion. So another important point to note is that fear-based propaganda, as well as being manipulated in our in our private lives, we've all heard of people being played with or emotionally manipulated in relationships, if people being abused and some such things like that. This is another consequence of going with feelings. If you just feel that this is the right partner for you, and yet they're displaying obvious signs that should rationally be interpreted as indications that they're not a good partner, if we're ignoring the reasons and the indications that are there, and that's a tendency to do this, with epistemology of emotion. No, I'm going with my feeling, heads down, don't really want to know. Very, very negative consequences in our personal lives. We can be emotionally manipulated as well as manipulated, politically, of course. If we're all told the environment's collapsing and the sky's falling in, if we all just accept that idea, well then yes, we will act to accommodate Agenda 2030, where in fact we shouldn't. So mind control, that's another one. Funnily enough, Patrick and I watched something on mind control last night, which was very interesting. Mind control is a big subject, but I would also advocate one of the huge benefits of us adhering to an epistemology of reason is that it effectively puts you in the driver's seat of your mind. It effectively puts you in control. If you're thinking, reasoning, deducing, inferring, conscious, you're seeking knowledge, it's like being at the wheel in your car. Yeah, you're there doing it, you're driving it, you're causing stuff to happen. Motion of the vehicle obviously being a metaphor for the motion of your mind acquiring knowledge. And if you're at the wheel, it's very difficult for somebody else, just to go to the automobile metaphor, it's very difficult for somebody to get in and take control. There's more to mind control, and as we know, because ideas can slip past our conscious mind, it's something we have to be very, very wary of, but we're much, much less likely to be influenced to act against our self-interest if we're adhering to an epistemology of reason. If we're going with our feelings, we can be influenced into anything. All somebody's got to do is frighten you. Boo! Oh, you know, so it's really, really important. We're totally susceptible to following the crowd, and ultimately the danger is acting against our rational self-interest. That's the important. And lastly on this is logical fallacies. So I've focused more on reason here because it's hugely the more important component of the two, of reason and logic, sorry. But logical fallacies are a means where we can be fooled. They are failures in this method of logic in our thinking. And again, if we're on the epistemology of reason, if we're convinced that we must listen to our hearts and our feelings, but we must evaluate the truth and discern truth exclusively according to reason, if we do that, we're far less likely to fall for logical fallacies. And there are lots of logical fallacies. I recommend anyone interested in making sure their thinking skills are up to speed, if you like, it's well worth looking at some basic courses of logic and familiarizing yourself with some of the logical fallacies. For example, the logical fallacy of, well, if everybody else thinks that's true, it must be true. That does not follow logically. It has credibility, the idea has credibility because we assume, again, it's an implicit assumption, we're not conscious of it, but we assume that everybody out there, all those other people that believe that thing, have all arrived at that conclusion logically. We are kind of assuming they've all done their own thinking, but of course they haven't. That's the danger with that. As soon as one person follows, it's like a herd of sheep. So the fallacy there is that numbers, of course, don't add up to a logical reason for anything. All they mean is that a lot of people hold that idea. That's the end. That's the end of where that goes. Doesn't go to any conclusion. So yeah, logical fallacies are we're very, very, very susceptible to them if we're listening to our hearts, if we're going with our feelings and emotions. Obviously, emotionally manipulative fallacies, inducing fear and so forth, especially, but all of the logical fallacies, there are lots of them. There's about 20 informal basic ones and others, but we could talk about some of them later on if you like. But again, we're very resistant to them with reason. So I was going to conclude with the idea, leave you with the idea that reason, my observation of my culture, my studies of philosophy and epistemology and thinking skills, which is my area of interest and passion, from looking at these subjects, my conclusion is that reason and its dominance in the minds of men, and I use that as a species term rather than a gender term, is in decline. We are in a culture which is becoming less and less rational. So that was where I wanted to sort of wrap it up. That's my conclusion. It's a debatable point, of course, and I'm sure people will have different ideas about that. So maybe that's if we can discuss that point. But other than that, I hope that I've brought some clarity to emotions, reason, and logic, and their absolute central role in forming a worldview that can help us live the best lives that we want to, help us realize our values, enjoy our lives, and achieve all our goals. It's really important. Reason is the fundamental. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you. Thank you. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.